الأرض بعد موتها إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يعقلون. صدق الله العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك، أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك، لا إله إلا نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. نويت بتعليم وتعلم وتذكير وتذكر والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلال على الخير ابتغاء مرضاته وقربه ثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم انشر علينا رحمتك وأنزل علينا حكمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Alhamdulillah, all praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is this on? Yeah. Firstly, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Hub. Really appreciate that you've considered bringing me here. Alhamdulillah, as Sidi Suhail mentioned, for the last couple of years I've been in interim and with a particular focus on the Quranic sciences. And during my studies, I came across this book, which really, I've never come across a book like that in its approach and in its material. It was a book by the great erudite scholar of Sham, Al-Shahid, Shaykh Muhammad Ramadan al-Buti rahimahullah, entitled Rawa'i al-Qur'an, the splendor of the Qur'an. And in it, he has two sections. The first section is, he discusses ulum al-Qur'an, the science of Qur'an, in a very generalized way. And then in his second section, he talks about the manhaj of the Qur'an, the methodology or the uniqueness of the Qur'an, which makes it really exclusive exclusive to the Qur'an and completely unique to any other book that's ever been written. I mean, just before we go through some of the exclusive features of the Qur'an, which the book mentions, I just want to point out something which is really important we need to bear in mind whenever we listen to anything or read about anything to do with the miracles of the Qur'an or the inimitable features of the Qur'an, the nature of the Qur'an. We should never forget that the primary goal of the Qur'an, despite its wondrous miracles, the primary goal of the Qur'an is that it's a book of guidance. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces this book and describes the book, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the book in either of two ways. He calls the book either a huda, a source of guidance, or he calls it a book or something, or he calls it tadhkira or dhikra, which is a reminder or a counsel. The Qur'an's primary function is this, that it's a book of guidance. It's a guidance for mankind, hudan linnas, and then it's a guidance more specific for the muttaqeen, those who wish to take on its guidance, basically. Those who are mindful, they are the ones who really truly receive its guidance. So the Qur'an, its primary function is that it's a book of guidance and it's a reminder. And anything additional to that is all secondary to the Qur'an. So whenever we listen or we read or we hear about the wondrous, inimitable features of the Qur'an, these are secondary. Because when the Qur'an came, it actually came to guide mankind, to rescue them from the shackles that they were in. And the nation that it came to was a nation who were at the pinnacle of their language, in their eloquence. And when the Qur'an came, firstly, its primary goal was to guide them. And in order to do that, the Qur'an had to convince them that this book is actually the book of the divine and it's not a work of an immortal. And in order to do that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used these features, these inimitable, these miraculous features which baffled the minds of the most eloquent of Arabs at that time. So you see, it's a key point to note that whenever we don't get caught up in the miracle. Oh, that's subhanallah, what a beautiful nuance, what a beautiful grammatical point. Yes, it is, but we don't stop there. We don't stop there. And this is what the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, that the Qur'an لِكُلِّ آيَةٍ ظَهْرٌ وَبَطْنٌ. For every verse of the Qur'an, there's an outward expression, there's an outward meaning, a surface meaning, and there's a hidden or esoteric meaning. So, so this is what the role of the Qur'an was. Firstly, to convince them that this is the book that is from the divine subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they asked for that. And they said, وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا أُنزِلَ عَلَيْهِ آيَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِ. They said that why doesn't signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from His Lord, come to him? Why doesn't the signs come to him? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ إِنَّمَا الْآيَاتُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ وَإِنَّمَا أَنَا نَذِيرٌ مُبِينٌ. That say to them that the signs are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that I'm just a plain warner. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the next verse, إِنَّمَا أَنَا نَذِيرٌ مُبِينٌ. أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِهِمْ أَنَّا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ يُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ. Allah says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, isn't it sufficient that they're asking for these signs? Isn't it sufficient that we have revealed this book to you so that you recite those signs to them? Meaning the Qur'an in itself is a sign. The Qur'an in itself is the proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's quite interesting how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is one of the features of the Qur'an, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a sudden shift, there's a constant shift in address, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about them first, that what they say, they're saying, that cannot a verse be revealed, cannot signs be revealed unto us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that say to them that the signs are revealed. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to His beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam, saying that isn't it sufficient for them? Isn't it sufficient to them that we reveal to you this Qur'an? Almost as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking directly now to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's like it's a personal conversation now. That isn't it sufficient for them that we reveal to you this Qur'an? So these are sort of the features that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in this book. And it's a book without doubt, a mighty book, a book which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّهُ كِتَابٌ عَزِيزٌ إنه كتاب عزيز لا يأتيه الباطل من بين يديه ولا من خلفه. That it's a mighty book. This book is a mighty book, and nothing from any falsehood, neither from before it nor after it, can come to it. Nothing from falsity can come to it, meaning there's no book, no resource, no literature that's ever been written that can challenge the Qur'an and prove that it's false. And there's nothing, no intellectual endeavor, no the greatest university, the greatest mind that can ever come after it and prove it to be false or take any mistake from it. It's not possible. So this book is a divine book without any doubt. Why is the Qur'an so important? That's our next question. Why is the Qur'an so important? Now, even though this question, as much as this question is an obvious question, if we were to ask ourselves, why is the Qur'an important? I think we would struggle to answer this question. We would struggle to answer this question. And probably one of the reasons why we would struggle to answer this question is because it probably doesn't have the role that it has or it's supposed to have in our lives. And if it doesn't have that role in our lives, then we won't really be able to answer what the purpose of the Qur'an is and why it's important to us. And it's probably, you might agree with me, it's probably one of the greatest tragedies of our time that we've distanced ourselves from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've distanced it to such an extent that we really don't even know some of the basic concepts, the basic messages that are revealed in this book. And it's, Ramadan is a time, it's always a time to attach yourself, connect yourself back to the Qur'an, but it's not the only time. It's a time where you program yourself, where you get yourself used to that. But essentially the book is a book of guidance for our lives from the time that we are born all the way up until we pass away. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so the book is a guidance and its importance. There's many ways we can explain why it's so important, but I think one hadith which came to mind, which I came across, was this hadith from Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa karramallahu wajha. It's in Arabic. To be honest, I didn't get time to translate it. Those who can read Arabic, hopefully they can probably take a bit more. Sayyidina Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he says that I heard the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam say, and just relate this to your lives and just relate this hadith to this age. And it's got all the answers for us. And it will answer that question, why it's so important. Why is the Qur'an so important in our lives? The Prophet ﷺ said that there will be fitan, there will be tribulations. There will be tribulations. There will be tests, trials, tribulations. And Sayyidina Ali turns around and he says, وَمَا الْمَخْرَجِ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. So what's the way out? What's the way out of these tribulations? And it's really interesting to note that the kind of question that Sayyidina Ali asks, right? Ask yourself, what question would you ask? If the Prophet ﷺ said there will be tribulations, what kind of question would you ask? And look at what the companions asked. And this summarizes the companions. This summarizes the companions, what they were all about. They knew how to ask the right questions. And Sayyidina Ali does that. He asks the right question. Any of the companions, whenever you hear a hadith and the companions ask a question, soon after, in that question is wisdom. And it's not for no reason that they say that half of knowledge is questioning. It's not for no reason. What did he ask? He doesn't ask, what's the fitan then? Come on, let's hear him. People get quite excited, don't they, when they, the end of time hadith and, oh yeah, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. He's asking a pertinent, on-point question. And the question is, Ya Rasulullah, what is the way out? How do we get out of that fitan? And if you think that you're not in the age of fitan, then there's probably something wrong, right? There's probably something wrong. So this is a hadith which relates to us. And he says, so he said, what is the way out, Ya Rasulullah? And the Prophet ﷺ said, Kitabullah, it's the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is your way out. That is your way out. That is your safety. That is your security. Why? Because فِيهِ نَبَأٌ مَا قَبْلَكُمْ. It has news of those nations that have gone before you. Those nations who have gone before you. When they say history repeats itself, that's what this hadith is saying. History repeats itself. that things that are happening now, they've happened before. There's nothing new that you're bringing, nothing new that you're seeing. It's happened. It's a cycle. It's a cycle that takes place. In it is the news of that thing, of those events. And what else? وَخَبَرٌ مَا بَعْدَكُمْ. And it has tidings of that which is to come. Meaning it has guidance to those affairs that are going to come, and how do you go about dealing with them. And then he says, وَحُكْمُ مَا بَيْنَكُمْ. And it's a judge between you. I'm not going to read all of the hadiths, just a few points. هو الفصل ليس بالهزل. It's a decisive source, and it's not a joke. ليس بالهزل, it's not a joke. Right? Does that resonate in our lives? How many things are completely pointless, and we engage in ourselves in so many pointless things. This is decisive. It's a decisive word, and it's serious. It's a serious book. And then he continues, وَمَنِ ابْتَغَى الْهُدَى مِنْ غَيْرِهِ أَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ. And whoever, this is a key point, whoever seeks guidance from other than this book, or anything that's linked to the Qur'an, whoever seeks guidance from that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will misguide him. That there's no guidance that's to be sought from any other material except the Qur'an or anything that links to the Qur'an. And then he continues, he says, وَحَبْلُ اللَّهِ الْمَتِينَ. It's a rope, a firm rope. It's a dhikr, it's a reminder. It's a sirat mustaqim, it's a straight path. And وَلَا يَخْلُقْ عَنْ رَدٍّ. That no matter how many times you repeat the Qur'an, you will never ever it will never wear you out. You constantly read it. Even if you repeat the Qur'an, you'll constantly feel that, it's just energizing you every time you read it. So this, like in a nutshell, I think it puts the importance of the Qur'an in perspective, right? In particular in these times. And you see, we live in times where we actually try and philosophize absolutely everything, right? And what this essentially does, and what the Qur'an essentially came for, is to give a simple message, to make things simple. And if you look at the life of the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was a master of simplification. He was a master of simplification. He simplified things, didn't make things difficult. And I think one of the greatest challenges in our time is to simplify some of the confusion that's out there. We're trying to intellectualize everything. We're trying to find philosophize everything. But sometimes we need to just get back to the basics. Just the basic, the basic guidance, basic messages, simplicity. And some simplicity, it has an eloquence, and that's what the Qur'an has. It's a simplicity which has eloquence, and we'll see that inshallah. So, as to continue now, so we've got the understanding of why the Qur'an is so important. Some of the exclusive features. Now, these are not exhaustive. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's something which really makes the Qur'an stand out and unique from any other book. The Qur'an, firstly, and some of the things you might have heard, but there's a slightly different perspective on it, inshallah. First thing is that in its composition, in its form, it's unique, it's unprecedented. The Arabs had a literature style. They had a style in prose, and they had a style in poetry. They were known. There was known styles that this is how you write, or so this is how you compose literature, both in poetry and in prose. In their poems, they had 13 odd rhyming meters. So they were well aware of literature. So when the Qur'an came, it came with a bang, so to speak. It introduced a book or concepts which were completely, as the style was completely different from what they had ever heard. Yet, it used similar styles that were already there. And the reason why it used similar styles from poetry and from prose, one of the reasons why, and there's a few reasons they explain, there's a big debate over does the Qur'an have poetry or anything like poetry in it, right? Like it's rhyming, the saj'a, the rhyming endings, are they is it borrowed from poetry, or is it completely unique to the Qur'an? There's a big debate about that. However, one of the best answers I came across, that does the Qur'an have that, Does it have the features that were already known to the Arabs, or was it a completely unique book and just completely, nothing, it was never ever thought of, and it was, just basically alien to them? No, it wasn't alien to them. It wasn't alien to them. It had features that were already there. And why that's important to have features that's already there is so that they can relate to that. Now, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing, that you use certain features, but I'll show you how to use the features even better. I'll show you how to use like a poetry form or a style even better than your style. So in its composition and in its form, it's unprecedented. Nothing like this ever came before. Then the next point is, it uses the best possible expressions. This is the uniqueness of the Qur'an, exclusivity. This is exclusive to the Qur'an. No other book shares this. In its expressions, when the Qur'an used expressions, it used them in the most eloquent way. And what makes it even more interesting is that the Qur'an, we know, is not a linear book. It doesn't start, there's no like A to Z. There's no, it's not a historical book. It doesn't go in order, so to speak. It won't start talking about stories of the prophets and then move all of a sudden to, or after finishing all the stories, move to all the legislations. After finishing all the legislations, moving on to the garden and paradise, or giving advice. The Qur'an has these sudden changes. There's a sudden change in the subject. There's a sudden change in topic. There's a sudden change in address. Now, all these sudden changes, if we were to speak like that, to constantly change and shift in what we speak about, it would be very difficult to maintain that eloquence and to be able to express that idea in the most best manner. It's very difficult to do that. I'll give you an example. Generally speaking, whenever we speak about anything generic, we're able to express that more eloquently. Why is that? Because we have a lot of metaphors, we have a lot of analogies that we can use. We've heard that speech constantly, and we're able to express that very easily. We're able to articulate that. But as soon as we start speaking about more specific matters, what starts to happen? We're not able. So, for example, speaking about football, if you like football, it's very easy to speak about football. You're very able to articulate yourself about football. Why? Because that's what you've been exposed to, and it's a general topic. But as soon as you start speaking at some things that are scientific, philosophical issues, what starts happening? You find it difficult to articulate yourself. And the Qur'an speaks about pretty much anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ, that it's an exposition of absolutely everything. What that means is there's not a single science, there's not a single idea out there, broadly speaking, except that the Qur'an has a reference to that. That the Qur'an, broadly speaking, it refers to that. So, despite these sudden shifts and despite the vast array of sciences and ideas that the Qur'an talks about, it still maintains that eloquence. Even scientific issues that the Qur'an, we all know there's so many scientific miracles in the Qur'an, there's a lot of scientific proofs. All these scientific proofs, when they're expressed in the most eloquent manner. And we'll see some examples of this, inshallah. Thirdly, the ability to communicate to absolutely everyone, regardless of your educational background. And this is what makes the book such a personal book. Right? You don't need to be this, intellectual giant or genius to be able to understand the Qur'an, to be able to relate to it. Why? Because it's a source of guidance. And in it, really, if you look at the greater picture and the greater understanding, or a higher level understanding, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making things easy. He wants you to make things easy for yourself as well. He won't make things difficult for yourself. So this ability, regardless of your tradition, your culture, the Qur'an will speak to you, each and every one of you and us, at our level. And the beauty of it is that one verse, any given verse has this ability. They say that a verse has three features. It has a sathi meaning, meaning a outward meaning, an outward expression, or a more immediate understanding. It has a umq, it has a depth, more profound meaning, And then it has this jadhur that they call, which is a deeply rooted meaning. The Qur'an has, every verse has these three things. It has an outward meaning, it has a more deeper meaning, and then it has this really deeply profound, deeply rooted meaning. And the beauty about it all is, well, yeah, okay, you know, that makes sense. I've kind of heard that before. The beauty of it is that all these three approaches or these three levels of understanding do not contradict each other, not in the slightest. What they do is they increase you in that understanding, but they won't contradict. So the apparent meaning will not contradict with the deeper meaning, and the deeper meaning will not contradict with the deeply rooted meaning. Let's have a look at this example. Sayyidi, min fadlikum. Yeah, tabarak alladhi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبارك الذي جعل في السماء بروجا وجعل فيها سراجا وقمرا منيرا.
Said he has something in his voice. So this verse, I haven't put the translation up on purpose, right? So we want you to kind of just break this down and focus on this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا, that blessed be Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who made in the skies, فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا, constellations. وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا, and made in it, in the constellations or in the sky, sirajan, a siraj, wa qamaran munira, and a moon which gives light. Now when you hear this verse, there's an apparent meaning. We're going back to them three levels. There's a sathi meaning, there's an outward meaning. The outward meaning, you could say for the layman, is what? When the layman looks at this, what does he see? He says that the Qur'an, the verse is really referring to two things here. It's referring to the sun and it's referring to the moon. And the idea that it's projecting is that both project light, both they're a source of light, or they give light. And there's absolutely nothing wrong in that meaning. That meaning is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong in that meaning to have that as an immediate understanding that there's two things, both have been mentioned separately as a figure of speech, and that they both, you know, are they give off light, or there's some sort of light exiting from them, and there's absolutely nothing wrong in that. And then the one who looks a bit deeper and reflects in what we call the umq, the depth, the more profound meaning, this person looks at this verse and sees that, or understands or decides that the sun's being mentioned, the moon's being mentioned, but the sun is actually being mentioned in a way that signifies that the sun is a source of light and heat, whereas the moon isn't that. And how did a person derive or arrive at this conclusion? Is through the word siraja. Just focus on this word siraj. That the siraj is usually a lamp, and a lamp is a source of light as well as heat. It gives off heat as well. So just this simple, just a bit more, just contemplating, pondering on some of the meanings a bit more, you're able to deduce this meaning. Now the question is there actually a contradiction between the two understandings? Absolutely no contradiction whatsoever. Right? There's no contradiction whatsoever. Which book can do that? Then you bring an expert, and you call the expert and say, can you look at this verse as well? And this person looks at this verse and he says, actually I deduce from this that the moon must be a black or a dark body, meaning it's not a body that gives light off by its own light. And why is that? Because of the word that's been used, the qamaran munira, that in English, probably the best way we could explain this is that munira is something illuminated. It doesn't illuminate, but illuminated. In Arabic, when they use the word, if they were to explain that a room is lit, they would say ghurfa munira. Isn't that right, Sidi? Ghurfa munira. They say that the room's lit. You wouldn't say that the ghurfa is a siraj, even if there was, because of something, exactly. They would say that the room is lit up, is illuminated. Why is it illuminated? Because there's a siraj somewhere, there's a lamp or a bulb somewhere. You wouldn't say the bulb is munir. You wouldn't say that. You wouldn't say the bulb is illuminated. Rather, the bulb is what gives off light. Right? And that's just the expert looking at this bit more detail, pondering over the verses a bit more, and getting to what? The jadhur, the deeper meaning. And we have traditions which say that there's, in every verse contains 600,000 meanings. And the meanings and anything above that are things that you haven't had access to. You haven't had access to, meaning that there's meanings that are, there's a infinite number of meanings. But anyhow, I mean, the point here, when we see this example, what we understand from this, and really what makes it unique is that you've got these three levels of understanding, but each understanding has no contradiction with the previous. It only builds, it only adds to that understanding. And that's through age. We can have it, can be, through time, through scientific discoveries. We're assisted in meanings, we can understand meanings more. Just like the next verse, if you look at the next verse,
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والخيل والبغال والحمير لتركبوها وزينة ويخلق ما لا تعلمون.
So the Lord Most Exalted is talking, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to some of the things that He's created as a means of, as rights, as vehicles, and as ornaments, things that you boast over. This, look at my horse, look at my mule. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions three things. He says the horse, the mule, and the donkey. And then, لِتَرْكَبُوهَا وَزِينَةً, so that you can ride on them, and they're a source of, it's a means, it's an ornament for you. And then later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, soon after, وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates what you don't know. Now, when the early generation recited this verse, most of their focus was on the first part of the verse, and they understood the second part in a slightly different way to how we do. And this is an example of how, through time, understandings evolve, yet they don't contradict the meaning. So they had access to these kind of vehicles. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, in terms of He creates, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates that which you don't know, you people now don't know, but soon you will know. So the modern means of transports that we have, trains, cars, aeroplanes, and even for us, we haven't come to the end of this verse. We haven't said, okay, we've finished now, we've come to, that's it. It's finite, we've come to the end conclusion of this verse. Even for us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing us and saying, وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and He creates that which even you don't know. When in the future there'll be other vehicles, everything. So this is an example again, through time, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases us in meaning, yet there's no contradiction. And that was the meaning of when we said that it's the ability to ability to communicate to everyone, irrespective of their cultures and traditions, and irrespective of time and age that you live in. So these are kind of the exclusive features of the Qur'an. In addition, one more we refer to is the phenomena of repetition. Now, I'm not going to get into too much into this because it's a bit nitty-gritty, but repetition, generally speaking, repetition, if it's not articulated in the right way, repetition can become boring. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses repetition in the Qur'an, there's one main purpose of repetition. And this links back to what the primary goal of the Qur'an was, and that is that it's a reminder. Allah repeats things for us because it's a reminder. It's like somebody mentioned a beautiful point. How many times does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeat the injunction, the command of prayer? How many times? Which is 80 odd times when prayer and zakat come together, 80 odd times or something. Yes, Sidi? Yeah. Yeah.
Ornaments, what does that mean?
Ornaments are like, what's another word for ornaments? Like display, yeah, like display, as a means to like boast over, be proud over, right? But in a nice way. What's that pride? That prideness. That prideness is to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He's actually bestowed you that you're not independent of that gift. It's rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you that gift. And this is why you have a hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah loves, inna Allah yuhibbu an yura athara ni'mat abdihi alayh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves for a servant to express and manifest the gifts that He has bestowed upon him. Right? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you wealth, express that, manifest that wealth. Don't be niggardly. Everything is in proportion. So for the wealthy person, his expression of his wealth will be different, or her expression of her wealth will be different to a poor person's. Right? You can't turn around and say, look at him, he's got 3 cars, he's showing off. Well, according to his wealth, that's actually a very modest expression of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed him. Right? So the repetition, going back to this repetition, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats things. It's a reminder. Inna dhikra tanfa'ul mu'mineen. That reminders, counsels, they benefit. The idea of reminders, a key concept in the Qur'an. Now we've kind of just the exclusivity. How much time do we have? I'll take too much of your time. 20 minutes, okay, inshallah. That was the kind of the exclusive features that the Qur'an came with. We're just going to move now onto the inimitable, the miraculous nature, the nature in which the Qur'an cannot be imitated. No matter how hard you try, you cannot imitate these features. That's the inimitable, or the mu'jiz, the i'jaz of the Qur'an. Just before we get into the i'jaz, it's important to understand what do we mean by that. The definition here that I've put up is that it's the lofty nature of the Qur'an. It's the lofty nature of the Qur'an that it exceeds, that it reaches such a stature that it exceeds the ability of any mortal to ever bring anything like it. And we know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenged them, they said, لو شئنا لكنا مثل هذا. If we wanted to, we would have said the same. We would have bring the same. Right? That was their first claim. Their initial claim was that if we wanted, we could bring the same thing. Allah says, okay, is that so then? Is that so? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them, and that challenge was 4-step. It was a 4-step challenge. Okay, bring a book like it. They weren't able to do that. Allah says, okay, bring 10 surahs like it. They weren't able to do that. Allah says, bring a surah, bring a chapter like it. They weren't able to do that. Allah says, okay, you can't even do that. Then bring something like it. Just bring something like it. And interesting how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala incrementally disgraces them. You could have started straight away and say, bring something, right at the end of it, bring anything like it. Allah starts from the top. So you understand that you are incapable of bringing anything like that. So it's the inimitability, is the inability for people to bring anything like the Qur'an. They're not able to do that. Right? And it's the test of time. Right? They say that the greatest test is the test which is an observed test, an empirical test. It's past the test of time. No one in that generation was able to do that. No generation after them, and no generation will come later. They're even more incapable. And it's a side note that whenever we have any of these like shubahat, these shubahat, huh? No, the shubahat as objections that are raised. Any objections that are raised in Islam. It's a little tip that whenever we have them, whether it's about the miracle of the Qur'an, the inimitability of the Qur'an, whether it's about the issue of Sayyidina Aisha and the Prophet ﷺ marrying her at a young age, whether it's the issue of the Prophet ﷺ marrying X number of wives, one of the best ways of tackling these kind of questions is this one example, this one way, this one approach, is that if it was what you claim it to be, if it was objectionable, if it was something really frowned upon, then guess who would have said it first? Who would have said it first? If it was something that to be frowned upon, it would have been that generation. It would have been them who were looking for absolutely any excuse to put the Prophet ﷺ down. They would have said it. They would have mentioned it straight away. And if they didn't see marrying X number of wives to be frowned upon, they didn't see that Prophet ﷺ marrying Sayyidina Aisha at her age, and they couldn't find a single mistake from the Qur'an, right? Then I'm sorry, that's a far greater proof for me than your objection, right? It's just a little side note, okay? So, the inimitability of the Qur'an, right? The Shaykh mentions, when he talks about the inimitability of the Qur'an, he restricts them to these four, but they're not restricted to these four. And that's because the Qur'an is mutajaddid. The Qur'an constantly renews itself. As we find new discoveries, as we find new ideas, we're able to bring to the front more and more of the miracles of the Qur'an. And this is why this science is a bit of a hot topic at the moment, because the science of Qur'an, the science of Qur'an, because there's such a mass, exponential increase of sciences that are out there and ideas that are out there now, which haven't been tested, which haven't been put and measured against the Qur'an. And they started doing philosophical issues, psychology, whatever. They're starting to apply them to the Qur'an, and they're bringing more and more miracles and more meanings and more inimitable features. So from the miracles, one of them is linguistic or composition. We're just going to look at that a bit more. We've had a little look at that. Then you got the news of the unseen, right? And that's quite obvious that the Qur'an, it talks about things, prophesies things, right? But one of those things, we're not going into too much detail, and we're going to have time for them anyway. We're just going to probably look at the first one. But just a little point on one of the things that really stands out from the unseen features, or sorry, the news of the unseen, that this feature, that this is a miracle of the Qur'an, is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, Allah challenges the Jews, for example. Allah challenges the Jews, and Allah says that that the Jews, they have a real love for life. That they don't want to die, right? They don't want to die. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them that this is one of the things about the Jews, that they just got this love for the life. They've just got love for life and for living, and they don't want to die. That it's this, it's like an unprecedented kind of thing, right? It's never, they really, it's one of the standout features of the Jews, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points out. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them. Allah says, فَتَمَنَّوُا الْمَوْتَ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Then okay, if you think you're truthful and you want to falsify what I'm saying, then desire death. Desire death. Now this is a challenge to absolutely every single Jew that's living there. Every single Jew, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them and say, desire death if you are truthful. And Allah says, no, Allah already informs us that they love life. They don't want to die. Now, all they had to do, this is one of the news of the unseen Allah gives, all they had to do was one thing. One of them to turn around, stand and say, I want to die. I don't. Yeah? وَلَا يَتَمَنَّوُا الْمَوْتَ أَبَدًا. That they will never ever, Allah said they will never ever want to die. Never ever. Right? All they had to do is one of them to stand up and kind of to be the sacrifice and say, I want to die, and he would have falsified the Qur'an. But Allah had already stated in the Qur'an, none of them, right? None of them will ever desire death. It's one of the examples of the news of the unseen. Then legislation, that's also a miracle, that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so many legislations, injunctions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives, yet there's no contradiction to them. That's an example. And then this is something that the Shaykh mentions, I've never seen before. Manifestation of lordship. What that means is, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses His kingship and His lordship and His rububiyyah in the Qur'an is actually a proof, and how that's compared to others who claim lordship, i.e. Pharaoh. And the difference between the narrative is a proof that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the real king. He is the divine. right? And these are kind of things, you need examples and you can understand that a bit more. We're just going to go on to this linguistic, a couple of examples we're going to finish off, inshallah. And if, inshallah, God, Allah willing, we have time in the future, we can continue this and, maybe, like a weekly kind of thing as long as I'm here. Linguistic composition. Now, linguistic composition, okay. Now, it's very important that we understand. Oh, is that right at the end, is it? Okay. When we talk about the linguistic miracle of the Qur'an, right, we're talking about the eloquence balagha, they call it in Arabic. Eloquence, what is eloquence? It's really important to understand this, to appreciate that the Qur'an is baligh, that the Qur'an is eloquent. It's very important. Eloquence, in a nutshell, is expressing something that's in the back of your mind or that you've envisaged, you've imagined, to express that. Okay, so you've got an idea, you've got a concept, you're going to express that in the most succinct, most best possible manner. There's no additional words, there's no waffling, and there's nothing that you've missed out. You are on point. The synonyms that you have used, the words that you have used are bang on point. There's nothing that you've missed. And it was exactly that which you envisaged, that is what you expressed and manifested. That's eloquence. That's eloquence. Okay, now we're going to look at this a bit more in a philosophical way now. Okay, you can't understand this definition. Is this definition understood? That is to express something in the most perfect way and it's the desired outcome. That was exactly what I wanted to say. That's eloquence, right? Now, you're probably thinking already, well, that's quite rare, right? The amount of waffling we do, especially in our times, it's quite rare. It is rare. And in reality, it's pretty much impossible, right? And that's why when you see something eloquent, you're absolutely amazed, ain't you? Right? This actually, I couldn't word this ever in a better way. I couldn't word this in a better way. And just look at this philosophy, right? Now, when we have something, we have an idea in our mind, and we want to articulate this idea, we want to manifest this in words now. There's a couple of things you've got to grapple with, right? Firstly, you've got to find some words for it. That's the most difficult part. I've got to go and find some words to express this now. So you open up the dictionary in your mind, right? And you look for the word, and that's going to take a bit of time. And then you find, well, actually, there's another word, there's a synonym, probably a bit better, I could use that one. And then you're caught in between synonyms, which one shall I use? And then after that, you come across another dilemma, which is, I've got this thought in my mind, I've envisaged this thing. However, words can't really express what I've envisaged. Words can't express what I've envisaged. Why? Because imagination and envisaging something is infinite. I can think of absolutely anything. Can you put a cap on how many things we can think about? How many things we can imagine? No? That's one of they say the intellect, the imagination is the sir of Allah in the cosmos. It's the secret of Allah in the cosmos. Because every time, every generation, they're bringing something new. It's like, who thought of that? It's the sir, it's the secret. It's the secret of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the cosmos. So you're with this dilemma now, how do I go about expressing that? Because words are finite, words are limited, and my imaginations are unlimited. So how am I able to express something unlimited in limited ways? So that's another dilemma. So can you see these dilemmas that you're facing now? And this leads to the idea that really to express something exactly how I want is impossible. Why? Because of human restrictions, because of shackles that we have, just innate human, natural disposition, by natural disposition, shackles that we have. We're not able to express absolutely everything. And then you have the other dilemma of our social background, our education, right? Some people have more words, some people have a richer vocab. But despite, regardless of how rich our vocab is, and regardless of what language we're going to express, we will always fall short. Why? Because of these limitations. Is that understood? Is that understood? Now when you think, just imagine now, imagine a expression, a articulation which is free of these shackles. Imagine an expression which is free of these limitations, that it doesn't have these limitations, That it doesn't, there's no this going through this process of I could have used this synonym rather than this one. And when you look at it again, or maybe I could have worded it like this. Imagine something, a resource, a book that expresses things without these limitations. Do you understand that? Yeah, imagine that. You can imagine it, can't you? Why? Because we have the Qur'an. The Qur'an is that thing, that it expresses everything eloquently, and eloquence is what we just explained. It's that every single thing in precision, and that is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's when we say that the Qur'an is baligh, and the balagha of the Qur'an is an inimitable, it's a miracle of the Qur'an. That is exactly what we mean. And we're just going to have a look at some examples. We're going to finish, right? We're going to finish the Sayyidi. Just want you to kind of, just to add to that, right? Somebody could say, well, Quran still uses words. It's still using words, so there's still an infinite amount of words that can never be used. That's true, but the Quran has another device that it uses to assist and kind of remove them shackles and add to that meaning. And you'll see, what I want you to do is to just listen to these verses attentively. I get Qari to recite them twice if you want, but just listen, and I want you to pay a particular attention to the assonance, the cadence, the rhyme, and the way the words are said, right? The way the sounds that come out. I want you to pay a bit of attention to that.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فالق الإصباح وجعل الليل سكنا والشمس والقمر حسبانا ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم فالق الإصباح وجعل الليل سكنا والشمس والقمر حسبانا ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم.
I hope that we got something from the sounds, and you've got the meaning up there as well. I'll just give you like a couple of seconds to just kind of gather some thoughts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he's the one who clefts, he's the clefter of the daybreak. Right? Faliq is the clefter, and the Isbah is the daybreak. وَجَعَلَ اللَّيْلَ سَكَنًا, and he made the night sakana. Right? And remember, just bearing in mind what we've said, that the Qur'an is always succinct. It's the most eloquent speech. It doesn't have these shackles. But this is an additional feature that really gives it its majesty and its glory. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just focus on this word sakana. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the night a place of rest, tranquil, calm, and I just pondered over the word itself. The word for calmness and tranquility is what? Sakana. Do you feel the calmness in that word? Do you feel the calmness in that word? All right. Why is that? Why do you feel the calmness in that word? Sakana. The lightest haraka in Arabic is what? The fatha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the lightest, and what? They all come in three in succession. Sakana. Right? That the night is what? Is a place of rest and tranquility. You hear that in the cadence, you hear that in the word itself. It's almost like the word is alive. It's tranquil in itself, let alone its meaning. The word itself, it's tranquil. Now move on to the start of the ayah. And Allah says what? Faliq. Right? The clefter. Doesn't that word itself kind of like, it has like personifies this action of cleftering asunder, right? Opening, right? Faliq. And then you have the word isbah. You have the word subh. Subh is the morning. Isbah is like the morning coming in with a movement. The day breaking with their movement. Look how Allah expresses that. All right, the meaning's there. The meaning will always remain intact, but this is additional to the meaning, how He assists the meaning. Faliqul isbah. That the night. Can you see even that kind of sibilance in there? The kind of like, the harmony in the words, right? And this is the majesty of the Qur'an. This is how it's so majestic. Another example. Should I give you this one? No.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لو يجدون ملجأ أو مغارات أو مدخلا لولوا إليه وهم يجمحون.
Focus now again, listen to that again, and focus on the three words. ملجأ مغارات and مدخلا.
لو يجدون ملجأ أو مغارات أو مدخلا لولوا إليه وهم يجمحون.
So you've just, I'm sure you've read the translation now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the disbelievers, or those who reject His signs. Allah says, if they were to find, لَوْ يَجِدُونَ مَلْجَأً, if they were to find a refuge or a shelter, أو مغارات, or caves, أو مدخلا, or places to enter into, they would run in, they would go into them, meaning just to hide themselves out of shame and out of, they've got no, they need to find some sort of shelter. Now these are kind of three synonyms that are being used, right? They all kind of give the same meaning, right? That if they were to find a shelter, find a cave, isn't cave a shelter? Or they were to find something underground, isn't that a type of shelter? But how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expressing these meanings, right? If they were to find a malja is a general safety, a general shelter. It can be like under the bus, what's the bus stop, right? It can be in a house, it can be anywhere, right? A general shelter. If they could find that, they'd do that, right? But they can't find it, so what do? Go into a cave, somewhere a more deeper shelter, somewhere where they can hide probably easier. A cave underground or in the mountains somewhere. And if they can't find that, what would they do? They go into a muddakhalan. They go into a real deep hole. And if you just focus on this, that's the meaning of the verse, that if they can't find that, they go on that. They just look for something to just hide themselves in. But if you look at the words, how they're used, and the sounds that they make, look at malja'an. Malja'an's like a simple shelter, malja'an, right? Then magharat, there's a bit more emphasis in there, a bit more a heavy ghain that's being used. Right, the ra is quite thick as well, to go into that. And then the final one, muddakhalan, there's a tashdeed, there's a shadda in there. Right, the shadda is given, emphasizing that meaning. Whatever type of cave, whatever type of hiding, they would go into it. And that's the beauty of the Qur'an, in its linguistic composition and the sounds and its harmony, that everything is so harmonious. I mean, it's hard enough getting something eloquent, right? Let alone adding these extra dimensions to it. Right? I'm going to finish off with this final one. It's one of my favorite ones. This is. Right?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولئن مستهم نفحة من عذاب ربك ليقولن يا ويلنا إنا كنا ظالمين.
Right, the verse, just a general understanding. This is a slightly different ijaz now. It's slightly different from what we've seen. This has a different angle to it, different perspective. This is one of the examples where you look at the generic meaning or the overall meaning of the verse, and then you apply that overall understanding and meaning of the verse to absolutely every particular of the verse. And you see that the general meaning of the verse is consistent, or the other way around, the particulars are consistent with the general meaning of the verse. Okay, what's the general meaning? What's the general idea that's been proposed here? The general idea is what? That if the slightest of punishment was to touch them, what would happen? They would just run away, right? They couldn't take that. They wouldn't be able to if the slightest. So that's the message, that if the slightest of punishments was to touch them, they couldn't cope with that, they wouldn't bear that, let alone the big punishment, let alone if something really hit them and struck them, right? So that's the understanding. If something slight, the emphasis really is on this idea of if something slight touches them, right? Let alone something big, something small touches them. Now we're going to put this greater understanding, this bigger understanding of the verse into the particulars of this verse. I need a bit of Arabic for this. Hopefully some of you who know a bit of Arabic will appreciate probably this a bit more. Right? How we start with, so we think, bearing in mind this verse is talking about if something slight and small was to touch them, what would happen to them? They would lose, they would lose their head basically. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses that same meaning in even the particular of the verse, that there's a slightness in absolutely every word that's been expressed. If you look at it, wala in. The lam here, the lam gives benefit to, it has a meaning of someness to it. That's some. Not all of it, some. It's a lighter kind of, there's not much of an emphasis, there's a lightness to it. Not in its sound, but in its meaning. Yeah? In, if, yeah? If, even in English, it's like, is it a decisive statement? It's not. There's a lightness, there's a lessness to it, there's a someness to it. Wala in. Then what? Massathum, touch them. Not hit them, touch them. Just a lightness again in that meaning. Bearing in mind the greater meaning. Wala im massathum. That's three things already which are denoting lightness. Min adhabi rabbik. Not the adhab from the Lord, but some of the punishment of the Lord. Some of the punishment of the Lord. Can you see from the greater meaning of the word, the overall meaning of the verse was what? If something light touches them, and when you look and you place that meaning in the particulars of the verse, you find that even the particulars allude to lightness and someness. La, in, massa. Yeah, nafha. I missed that nafha. Nafha is something which is a light like a light blowing of something, like just a lightness. You got nafatha, you got nafakha, a bit more, and then you got nafaha, right? Something a bit lighter. So if lightness, so all these words are referring, they allude to lightness, which is the overall meaning of the Qur'an. And these are like some of the features, the majestic features of the Qur'an, the inimitable, what makes the Qur'an inimitable. And the whole point, like I said, the whole point of studying or listening to anything like this is that it should increase your reverence for the Qur'an, right? But bearing in mind always that these are secondary, and for me that's what makes it much more majestic. That was never, these subtle nuances in grammar and these linguistic nuances were never the point. They weren't the primary point of the Qur'an. Yet as a secondary, if the secondary is such majestic, then what do you think of the primary? How majestic is that going to be, right? And it's really it's really sitting. I think Shaykh Hamza he has a talk on how to read a book. I didn't listen to all of it, but I listened to about 20 minutes. This was some years ago. I might have even forgot. But I remember him saying that there's actually no easy how to read a book. What's the most effective way of reading a book? And he says, well, actually, there's no real way of reading a book except reading the book. That you have to sit with the book and read it. There's no shortcuts to anything. There's no shortcuts to reading. And it's the same thing. You have to sit with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's not until we sit with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're ever able to appreciate it. And you could say, well, I don't know Arabic. Believe you me, how many people have come into Islam just through reading the translation of the Qur'an? If that didn't have something in it, then it wouldn't. I mean, we were in Yemen, and during the Dawrah, the 40-day Dawrah, there was a couple of brothers who came from Canada, and honestly, because Habib Umar, Hafidahullah, he's quite big in the Mawlids. He likes the convert brothers to stand up and deliver a talk, for reasons known and unknown. And a lot of them, they said that we came into Islam by reading the books of Imam Haddad, the translations of Imam Haddad, right? Book of Assistance and other books. We came into Islam just by reading these books. I mean, and Imam Haddad says that I placed my secrets in my writing. He's only written there's only about 13 published books of Imam Haddad, right? The great scholar. I'm sure you guys have heard of him. But he said, and they're all short epistles, they're all short works. And he said, I placed my secrets in my books. And if that's the work of a mortal, what do you think of Allah's words? Even if you translate them, honestly, even if you translate that and you read the translations, there's something. But inshallah, hopefully, if nothing, it gives you like this sort of comfort that, it's possible. And hopefully like a bit of a desire to wanting to learn the language. Why not? I mean, we'll learn everything else. We spend our efforts in everything else. Why not? And even if it's small, they say it's not. Sometimes the end result is not the point, and in fact, it's never the point. The end result is not in your hands. That's destiny. That's Allah's already destined that for you. But our responsibility is the pursuit for it. Right? The pursuit. Where are you in your pursuit? And it's not where I was or where I'm going to be in a year or 2 years' time. It's where are you now? Where's your pursuit right now? Ask yourself that question. Where's your connection with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? Because if the times of fitan, going back to that hadith, time of fitan, the kitab Allah, that's Sadiq al-Masduq, that's the one who's the most truthful and whose words are believed in. That's what he's saying to us. That's our way out. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase our connection, just instill that little fire to wanting to pick up that book and understanding that book. We've got 11 days. We've got 11 odd days. 10 and 11, right? We've got 10 and 11 days left till Ramadan. Set yourself some targets. Book of Allah, translation. It's like, just get into it, right? Get into it, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Sorry for the bit of the delay as well. Got a timer. Jazakallah Sayyidi. And Qari Umar as well. Do you want to make a dua?
آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل عليه يا ربنا في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اجعل القرآن العظيم ربيع قلوبنا وشفاء صدورنا وذهاب همومنا وغمومنا وأحزاننا. اللهم اجعله حجة لنا لا علينا. اللهم ارزقنا تلاوته آناء الليل وأطراف النهار على الوجه الذي يرضيك عنا. اللهم اجعلنا من أهل القرآن وخاصته. اللهم اجعله لقلوبنا ضياء ولأبصارنا جلاء ولذنوبنا ممحصا وعن النيران مخلصا. اللهم انقلنا بالقرآن العظيم من الشقاء إلى السعادة ومن البدعة إلى السنة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الأخيار وسلم تسليما كثيرا. آمين. Yeah, yeah.